Welcome back, my friend. My name is Victor Nieves. You're listening to the Victor Nieves Show. We have got a lot of stuff that we need to talk about. The theme of today's episode is going to be that the United States is a Christian nation. Now, we'll dive into that and a handful of other things. But of course, before we do, I want to start off the best way that I know how. That's by taking just a second to give glory and honor to the only one that is deserving of glory and honor. That's my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. You know, I try very hard to talk about issues that matter, to talk about things that are relevant and insightful and all of that. But regardless, even if I did the best job in the entire world, the best political commentary ever, all of that would pale in comparison to the importance of where you spend your eternity. And genuinely, sincerely, I hope to see you in heaven. So the most important thing I could ever tell you is to accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. Now, before we jump into the meat and taters, I do want to say, I'm very proud to say this, a long time ago, when the show officially returned, whenever it returned in regular podcast form, as well as on the airwaves, on radio stations, I told you that I would eventually make this available in video format as well. That'll be on my YouTube. And I'm proud to tell you that today, for the first time in a really, really long time, this will be available on YouTube. So if you don't subscribe to me there, be sure that you do. Just search It's Victor Nieves like on every other social media platform. And fingers crossed, you should be able to find me there. And we'll be clipping this and doing things like that. But I wanted to throw that out there. Big appreciation to everyone who's listening on podcasts, on radio stations. I appreciate you tremendously. Now let's jump into it today. America is a Christian nation. Now, funny enough, I have said that to you many, many times, but when I say it today, it's not actually my own words. In fact, I am taking those words, America is a Christian nation, those 5 words, from Supreme Court Justice, David J. Brewer, in a case that, in all honesty, I'm a little bit ashamed of myself. I had not known anything about. I learned about this maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks ago. I learned about a Supreme Court case, and I encourage you to do a lot of research on this. I have done a lot of research as well in preparation to bring this to you. The case was called Church of the Holy Trinity versus United States. It was 1892 that this case was argued. And Justice Brewer presented the opinion of the court. And there's a lot of information. I'll summarize some of it in this podcast. But one of the things that he said, I want to read to you from lsd.law, just as a source out there, you can check it. They report on what he had to say in this decision and say, quote, "The court also acknowledged the United States as a Christian nation, one that respected Christianity in its laws and its culture." Now, that is ironically the exact thing that I've been trying to communicate for the last couple of weeks. We've touched on this, obviously, on the program. We've touched on this in, individual standalone posts. The United States is a Christian nation. And when you say that, there's a handful of knee-jerk responses that you will oftentimes get. One of the most common, if not the most common, is the response, well, what about separation of church and state? And of course, if you're really well-versed, or honestly well-versed at all whenever it comes to the Constitution, you'll know that that's not in the Constitution. I mean, those words, separation of church and state, are literally nowhere to be found, at least in that order. You might be able to do some sort of bizarre compilation, like page 3, page 10, but you'll never find separation of church and state, those words in that order, in the United States Constitution. Most people think it's in the First Amendment. Nowhere to be found, right? If you read it, it says, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. What's very clearly communicated in the First Amendment is that Congress cannot establish an official religion. And when we say that the United States is a Christian nation, I want there to be no misunderstanding. I don't think anyone is under a false assumption that our government is operating within a church. I mean, historically speaking, that's something that has happened before. We had the Church of England, and in fact, going through, the history of Europeans eventually coming to the New World, the Church of England was, and the Catholic Church was largely responsible for that. There was religious persecution. People were burned at the stake as being a heretic. There is something bad that can happen whenever you have a merger between, especially maybe a church, like in the case of the Church of England, maybe not the greatest foundation of some of that stuff. That's a whole nother can of worms for a whole nother day. But whenever you mesh them too closely, you can get bad things, okay? Nobody's denying that taken to the extreme, just about anything can become bad. But nobody's under the false assumption here that the United States is Christian in the sense that we currently have some sort of a requirement that you have to profess your faith, for example, before you can hold a position of power or authority. No one is under the false assumption that that is the case. But when we say, or when I myself, I guess I'm the only one I can speak on behalf of, whenever I say that the United States is a Christian nation, I always clarify by saying that we are Christian in culture. Our culture is Christian. Last week on the program, I talked about how every single people group has to have some sort of a common understanding of right and wrong. We have to have a moral basis, a bedrock of sorts that we use to judge things. In fact, that's kind of where we get the idea that something is a good piece of legislation. Well, if we're going to say that something is good, that implies an ethical framework, a moral standard by which we can judge things and say, oh yeah, it's good, for example, to prohibit someone from stealing from their neighbor. Where do we get that idea that it's bad to steal from your neighbor? Well, in the Western world, for real, if you keep tracking it back, it goes to the Ten Commandments. It goes to biblical worldview. And so what Justice Brewer was saying in his opinion in this court case, which to give a tiny bit of background, there was legislation trying to prohibit the importation of foreign labor. This has apparently been a problem that has gone way back in time. They were dealing with this a long time ago. They didn't want foreign labor coming to the United States and taking American jobs. And so there was a law passed prohibiting it and so on and so forth. And what had happened was there was a church, the church that was involved in the lawsuit, that had hired a pastor from across the pond. Someone over in, I think it was England, they hired this pastor to come and lead their church. And so there was a lawsuit brought forward. And it was essentially decided, though this is a pretty gross summary of it, it was essentially decided that, yes, technically they did break that law. They imported someone else. But, and now this is actually a school of jurisprudence I'm not typically a very big fan of, they said the intent of the legislation isn't necessarily the black and white of the legislation. They said that law wasn't meant to prohibit a pastor or something like that. It was really meant to prohibit unskilled, like tradesmen or something like that. People who are going to go and do physical labor jobs and take those jobs from Americans. The law was not passed with the intent of prohibiting clergymen from coming and, pastoring a church. And so essentially, what Justice Brewer did here is he explains kind of his reasoning for that, which is totally, it's predicated on his correct understanding that the United States historically, in culture, is a Christian country. And if you haven't ever heard of this opinion, I really encourage you to go through and read it in depth. I've been doing, again, like I said, quite a lot of that over the last couple of days and weeks, and reading into his decision. He goes way back, even into Europe, and he follows the progression of Christianity and how fundamental it was to the American story. I want to read you just a little bit of the Mayflower Compact, which, historians pretty much universally agree is the first governing document of the New World. It was literally written on the Mayflower. They said, hey, we have to come together and have some sort of a basic agreement as to how we're going to operate. And the very first words of the Mayflower Agreement are, quote, "In the name of God, amen." Right? There's no question about whether or not there was a religious motive whenever it came to coming to the New World. Another bit I want to read to you from the Mayflower Compact, like one or two sentences later. They said, having undertaken for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith and the honor of our king and country, they've, undertaken a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia. And they go on about how they're doing this in the presence of God and how they want to honor him. They want to spread Christianity into the New World. That's a great example, and they continue. And we're going to cover a few more of these as today's program goes on. But he continues to lay out example after example of how the United States culturally, historically, had that moral foundation of Christianity. One of the examples that was given by Justice Brewer whenever he discussed the United States being a Christian nation was Article 22 of the Constitution of Delaware, 1776. It required, quote, all officers to make and subscribe to the following declaration, quote, I do profess faith in God the Father and in Jesus Christ, his only Son, and in the Holy Ghost, one God, blessed forevermore, and I do acknowledge the Holy Scriptures of the Old and New Testament to be given by divine inspiration. Now, quiz for everyone today. Let me know, and as always, quick reminder, feel free to reach out to me through social media. You can also email the show, thevictornievesshow@gmail.com. Just let me know whatever you've got on your mind. I am happy to hear it. Maybe I'll even cover it in a future program. But let me know, did you study that one in history? Now, by the way, Delaware was not the only state that had something of this kind. And again, Justice Brewer goes through several of these different examples. We had in our nation's history anti-blasphemy laws. I've talked about this before. And nowadays, many Christians would hear something like this, and they would kind of freak out, right? If they heard, myself or another conservative talking about how we would support something like this in a hypothetical world. If we were to support something like requiring elected officials to take an oath, essentially, a proclamation of faith to their entire constituents, people would freak out right now, and they would say, no, separation of church and state. Okay, well, listen, these are documents that were written at the very least at the same exact time that our founding fathers were alive. Many of these documents literally being written by our founding fathers. Something tells me that those guys had a pretty solid understanding of what they meant, okay? And it's no coincidence. I want to dive into this thought for just a second here. It's no coincidence, in my opinion, that the secular government schools, the public school system that we have in this country, doesn't teach America's true heritage, America's godly history. They don't mention the overt days of prayer that George Washington ordered for the Continental Army. They don't mention the fact that there were Bibles that were printed literally for the public school system in the very beginning. They don't talk about, the 10 Commandments being in every courtroom and the plethora of examples of founding fathers directly attributing the success of the Revolutionary War to actual divine intervention. Our nation's past is so full of overtly Christian religious themes, it's completely undeniable. And I've been hitting this theme a lot lately, and ordinarily I don't want to beat a dead horse, but this is a horse that needs to be beaten, okay? We have to get this through our heads, that as we depart from God, believe it or not, our society becomes more godless. We start to have issues that we never had before. I mean, it is a perfect one-to-one correlation. You start taking God out of schools, you start, suing any church or organization that tries to put a nativity scene up in, public, a government building or something like that. You're not allowed to do that. You start to do everything in your power to spread a hedonistic, godless worldview that essentially tells young people that you're nothing more than matter in motion, you're a giant cosmic accident, you're a bunch of dust that has no meaning, no purpose, you're just this weird meat-covered computer And you don't have to obey the laws of God or the laws of nature. You only have to do whatever is so hedonistic that it'll bring you pleasure in the moment. And then we as a society, we scratch our head and we think, well, how could this happen? You know, I want to say this to all of the Christians out there. And again, I know I have listeners that may not be Christian, but to all of the Christians out there, I saw this the other day and I shared it onto my Twitter. I can't take credit for it because it's not my original thought here, but I will echo it proudly. We need to once again view, quote, because God said so, as a good answer, or because, quote, the Bible said so, as a good answer. We have become petrified to actually use our faith and stand on it. You know, everything that's going on right now, it makes it more and more obvious by the day that we are witnessing a clash of worldviews. Really what's happening right now, even in American politics, isn't so much about politics, right? When's the last time you heard, well, with the presidential election, it is kind of happening, albeit to a maybe back burner degree. When's the last time you heard people in politics on cable television debating back and forth about a policy regarding economics or something like that? I mean, you'll hear the debates about Bidenomics, Trump-style economics, and which one's better. But most of the stuff that we're hearing discussed right now, the things that really have the most weight to them, aren't those political debates. It's not about, oh, should we repair this bridge that way or this way? It's not about, hey, should we fund this program or something? Obviously, there is some of that going on, but a lot of what we're facing, whether it's abortion, whether it's the transgender stuff, all of these different things, we're really seeing a conflict of worldviews. And so many of these issues aren't even really necessarily political. And that's also, by the way, an important opportunity to segue and mention this. The church, because of the way that politics and worldview issues have begun to mix in the United States over the last couple of decades, the church has this faulty understanding about what is political and what is not. The Word of God is not political, it's the Word of God. Just because there are people who hold a different political ideology than you and simultaneously disagree with the Word of God, therefore attempting to make it political, doesn't mean that it actually is. And I say that to say that you as a Christian, you particularly as a pastor, you cannot cower away from topics just because they have entered into politics. These are topics that predate political discourse. These are topics that go back to the beginning of time and the morality that was established by God. For example, something that just pops into my head, the definition of marriage really isn't supposed to be a political issue. It's not. Marriage is an institution of the church, and I do not say that to take a libertarian stance on this and say, oh, well, I don't care. It's really not the government's business. No. I say that to say the issue of marriage predates the political issue of marriage, and pastors have become afraid to talk about the fact that marriage is between one man and one woman. That is what is right. That is what a pastor should stand for. But we have an awful lot of Christians and an awful lot of pastors who are afraid to talk about that. They're afraid to stand up on a pulpit and say, listen, this whole transgender stuff is an insult to God. This whole legalizing gay marriage and things like that is an abomination in the eyes of the Lord. That is not a political statement. That is a biblically based statement, one that we have to, as Christians, be willing to actually stand on. Otherwise, again, we're giving up our faith, cowering away, and giving them everything that they want. Now, as we've been talking today about the central theme of this episode being that the United States is a Christian nation, specifically a Christian nation in culture, it sort of presents a perfect segue of sorts to talk about the next issue that I want to hit on, and that is the Libertarian Party. Now, I've talked about this briefly on social media in the last couple of days, so if you've been following me on Twitter, my apologies for any redundancy here, but the Libertarian Party is so thoroughly deserving of every bit of trash talk and smack talk that we could possibly afford to deliver to it. I am someone who, for a very long time, relatively speaking, I suppose, considered myself to be a quote-unquote classical liberal or a libertarian. I am fairly well-read, I would like to think, on the thinkers and the philosophy behind libertarian ideals, and I would go so far as to say in a world where everyone operated within the Christian faith, right? If you had a population that was 100% Christian and actually abided by the moral codes of Christianity, you could get away with an awful lot of libertarian ideology. Unfortunately, we do not live in that world, and therefore libertarian ideology is a pipe dream, no different than the pipe dream of communism. We all point and laugh as we mock the ideas of Karl Marx that the government would get so big that it could equally distribute everyone, everybody would have an equal piece of the pie, and then they would just dissolve. Which, if you haven't heard that, it's actually quite funny. Literally, the idea of communism is that the government would get so big that it could effectively distribute the wealth to everyone equally according to their needs. And then one day, for no explainable reason whatsoever, the government would just self-dissolve because everyone would be equal. Yeah, there's a reason that communism never works. It's a pipe dream. It makes absolutely no sense as to why that would ever happen. Well, the same is essentially true whenever it comes to libertarian philosophy. And right now, we have something in the Libertarian Party that is really, it's embarrassing. Maybe that's the best way for me to put it. It is embarrassing. And let me preface, just so I don't step on too many toes, if you happen to be a libertarian, my purpose in talking about this is not to insult you, rather to insult the Libertarian Party, because it is an actual organized official political party, and it has a candidate on the ballot in November and running in the general election against Donald Trump. There is someone who is a libertarian, a guy named, what's his name? Chase Oliver? Something like that. It might be Oliver, I don't know. And he is espousing beliefs that are so asinine and so dumb, and the Libertarian Party has appointed him to be their candidate to run for the United States president. This is a man who, on record, the tweets are all still out there. Many of them can be found on my Twitter. This is a man who has said that he wants to abolish ICE. He wants open borders. He has said that he would be comfortable leaving his child with a drag queen. Talk about delusional. He's actually a homosexual. He loves to wear masks. He loves to hang out with socially progressive Marxists. This is a guy, by the way, who voted for Barack Obama. I know, right? He's a libertarian. Doesn't sound like much of a libertarian to me. He kind of sounds a little bit more like a progressive leftist. But he is now the embodiment of the Libertarian Party. And if you ever wonder, why is it that we have a two-party system and the libertarians can never gain any ground and they're always losing? Yeah, well, this is why. This is a really profound example as to why they continue to lose, because it's a deeply unserious political party that is based around a pipe dream. The libertarians that understand how life works and politics, they understand, practically speaking, how to actually get on the scoreboard. They are not members of the Libertarian Party. They don't vote in a general election for a libertarian. Most of the people who at this point, and hopefully I'm wrong, hopefully this is changing, hopefully they're leaving the Libertarian Party because they have enough sense to understand how to actually get some wins. The people who understand how it works are Republicans. They're registered Republicans. They vote Republican in a general election, but they happen to have very limited government philosophy, and they try to influence the Republican Party from within, which if you were a libertarian, that would be the thing that you should actually try to do. It's your only hope at getting any W's. But instead, what has happened is the Libertarian Party has become a flexing competition where everyone tries to prove that they're more radically anti-government, pro-anarchy than the guy next to them. And they will literally, unironically, as has now the presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party, they will literally sit there and say that they want basically limitless abortion, they want no border, they want to legalize every hard drug out there. Talk about insane. They want to do all sorts of things that the average American not just like rolls their eyes at, but it looks at in complete and total disgust. Well, why do I bring all of this up now? Why am I attacking the Libertarian Party right now? Well, because we have a general election coming up. Donald Trump recently went and spoke at their convention, which was brilliant. He effectively displayed, well, why he is the author of The Art of the Deal. He said, essentially, in maybe more words or less, the same thing that I just said right now, that the Libertarian Party is a joke, that it has become a laughingstock of a bunch of ideologues trying to prove that they're more radically libertarian and pro-anarchy and that they use less deodorant than the guy next to them. And that politically speaking, libertarian and loser are synonyms. He said you can enjoy your 3% at max that you might be able to get in a general election, or you can vote for Donald Trump. And the man got a lot of boos because, opposition party or whatever. But then Trump started offering them the deal side and the art of the deal. He offered them cabinet positions. He offered to commute the sentence of Ulbricht, something that they have wanted for a very long time. He offered the libertarians to actually get on the scoreboard, something that they have literally never been able to do. And now the question is, to any of you who may be libertarians, do you actually want to get some wins? Do you actually want to make a difference? Or do you want to flex your political uniqueness? Oh, I'm not a member. It always makes me laugh. Tangent time. It never fails to make me laugh when I hear somebody think that they have this super high IQ, big brain moment where they say, well, actually, both parties are terrible, and I'm a third party. I'm an independent because both sides are bad. Yeah, good for you. You want a cookie? You're very special. That's very nice. You can continue playing in the sandbox when the adults are done. What do you want? Do you want a cookie? You want a high five? You want a special little hat with a little twirly thing up on top of it? It's like the meme where there's a bell curve of IQ, and at the bottom of the bell curve, you have people who understand, like, oh yeah, these are our two options. That's all we get. In the middle, you have the people who think that they're smart, but they're actually not, who are like, I'm not going to participate in the two-party system. And then at the top end of the bell curve, you have the actually high IQ people who say, this might be imperfect, but my best way to make actual meaningful change in the direction of the agenda that matters to me is to participate within the current system that involves two parties. This idea that you're going to be like, yeah, well, both sides are bad. We know that. We all know that. Literally everyone knows that there are bad Republicans and there are bad Democrats. This isn't some profound, incredible statement. Thank you, Socrates. It was a good attempt. The truth is, if you want to get something done, you have to operate in a way that gets things done. And so, with that said, the option for libertarians out there is to vote Donald Trump, or you can cut off your nose to spite your own face. You can show everyone, you can do this moral grandstanding and what is akin to virtue signaling by telling everyone that you're not going to vote for, I'm not going to vote for the lesser of two evils. Okay, let's talk about this libertarian guy, lesser of two evils, sure. But you're not going to participate in that system. No, you're better than that, right? You can do that, and we can all point and laugh at you. Or you can vote in a way that actually makes a difference, okay? And by the way, I mean, I've had my dissertation, I guess you could call it, on why I'm no longer consider myself a libertarian. Maybe it's worth touching on. I suppose I haven't mentioned that in a while on the show. I used to. Listen, I have all of these harsh words as someone who used to self-proclaim. I said I am a libertarian. I said that many times, even potentially as recently as I may have said that on air before. I may have even said that on this show in the past. I may have laid positive claim to the idea that I am a libertarian. The reason I am no longer a libertarian, and the reason I never affiliated with the Libertarian Party, I voted as a Republican with libertarian philosophy, was because I was smart enough to understand how to get things done. But the reason that I no longer consider myself a libertarian, and I've touched on this a little bit, is that it is an insufficient solution to the problem at hand. Again, if in a perfect pipe dream world everyone was a Christian and everyone operated in good faith and everyone agreed to live in this libertarian utopia, it would be awesome. I mean, that would be super, super great. It would be very logical. I get the concepts of the free market, and trust me, I understand it. I understand it extremely well. But libertarian philosophy, in its purest form, is actually this current candidate. When you are so anti-government that you become an anarchist, listen, there's a reason. Remember, I told you that the current state of affairs of the Libertarian Party is a flexing competition to prove who's more libertarian than the guy to their left or right, as well as who uses less deodorant than the guy to their left or right. The reason that the Libertarian Party is where it is right now is because it went to the most extreme point of libertarian philosophy. People may hear where it is right now and think that's not libertarian. Open borders and no government at all, and abolishing ICE and legalizing hard drugs. You might think that whoa, that's not libertarian at all. Actually, it's kind of libertarianism in its purest form. The whole gay pride flag with the rattlesnake on it, and the whole thing of like, yeah, I don't care if you trans your kids, so long as you're not taking my guns. Like, that actually kind of is libertarian ideology in its purest of forms, and it presents no way to combat the social degeneracy and the absolute evil that we're seeing happen in our society. All of this trans stuff and all of the forcing of this social agenda. Libertarianism simply cannot combat that. It can't combat it in any meaningful way. It gets back to the fact that we have a clash of worldviews that's happening, and we have to respond accordingly, and libertarian philosophy is insufficient. All right, so with all of that we've talked about today aside, for the last segment today, I want to talk about something that I don't think I have ever talked about at any point, maybe in any form. I don't think I've ever written about this, done a video about this, a podcast, radio. I don't think I've ever touched on this before. But as my now wife and I were driving a couple of weeks ago, I had something, I don't know if I should call it an epiphany. That makes it seem a little bit more grandiose and significant than maybe it was. But I had the realization as we were talking about some famous people, I don't know, this must have been some drama or something, that conservatives perhaps have had a bad strategy whenever it comes to addressing famous people. And listen, I am so super guilty of this, okay? Just for the record, for anyone who's listening to I'm talking to myself probably more than I'm talking to anyone else, because I'm really guilty of this. But we, as a movement, we have kind of become a movement of opposition in many ways. And I know I have talked about how conservatives have to create culture and not just react to it. This is something I've mentioned before many times about how we have this tendency, I suppose, to just constantly say, no, well, we don't want that. That's bad. And it's like, well, what do we want? Well, not that. That's bad. Okay, hang on. Take a couple of steps back. I hear that that's not good, but what do we want? right? And then of course the conservative response is, well, not that, that's bad. And I agree, that's like super, super terrible, a lot of the things that we're seeing, but what's the counter? What is the the other option, you know? Well, for example, to put this in very clear terms, we'll see a really stupid mural or something, and we'll be like, what the heck is that? That's not art. You see this stuff, and you're like, man, what is that? It looks like somebody welded together a bunch of random scrap pieces of metal. This isn't art. This is stupid, and we'll criticize that. But what we ought to then do next is, well, we shouldn't be offering criticisms without solutions. We should be saying, okay, I don't like the stupid modern art that looks like a bunch of random pieces of scrap metal that were welded together. Instead, how about we do a realistic mural of a mother who has children, or of like a man who's achieved some great success? This isn't rocket science, excuse me. Human beings, Western culture has done this for the last 1,000 years. You know, we put up sculptures to people who have done great things, and you know, the beautiful, beautiful artwork of the artists of the past. That's what we ought to be doing. But we have to be able to produce culture. We have to be able to produce things that we like. And kind of in a similar vein, we have that reactionary, no, I don't like that. No, this is really bad. We have that very oppositional tendency, that bent toward just saying, no, I don't like that. It's cringe and stupid and woke and dumb. And we apply that at times toward extremely influential and very powerful people. Two examples of this that I'm specifically thinking of: Mark Zuckerberg. And hang on. I am not playing defense for Mark Zuckerberg. That man is not our friend, okay? For the record, that man is not our friend. Zuckerbucks in elections, bad news. Facebook censorship, bad news, okay? But one person that I think of, Mark Zuckerberg. Another one I think of, people are going to burn me at the stake for this. I already know the conservatives, they're going to be mad about this. Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift is someone who we vilify constantly, and I'm almost hesitant as I discuss this topic, because we should, I've said this so many times, we should call out evil when we see evil. 100%. We need to. We need to do that day in and day out. When we see somebody do something bad, we should call it out. And if there's one thing that we are good at as conservatives, it is that one singular thing. But what we also seemingly have made no effort whatsoever to do is to win those people over to our side. And the reason I think about those two individuals in specific is that Taylor Swift reportedly, I don't know the lady, I'm not some super fan or anything, but just from what I've heard, Taylor Swift comes from a relatively conservative family. Her father is relatively conservative. It's my understanding that she considers herself to be a Christian, that her family is Christian. Mark Zuckerberg, he's a guy, I don't know about his faith, but he's a guy who has spent the last couple of years training in combat sports like jiu-jitsu and like kickboxing and things like that. And as I hear these details about these two people, I think to myself, whoa. They should be on our side. These are people, I mean, think about what happened whenever Elon Musk, because it wasn't that long ago, he was not on our side. Elon Musk, seemingly, based on his actions over the last 2 years, is on our side. I mean, this is a guy who is opening up free speech, and he's sharing things on Twitter, and you're like, whoa, I can't believe Elon Musk just tweeted that. I mean, that's crazy. He's like pro-life now and all this stuff. These super powerful, super rich, super influential people are constantly being courted by those on the left. You have these liberals that are constantly trying to win them over to their side, and they've been weirdly successful inside of Hollywood. It's almost like you can't be there unless you're a liberal, and part of that obviously is coercion and pressure and getting blacklisted and things like that. But another part that comes before the coercion, before the pressuring, before the blacklisting is the fishing. The left is always fishing to get these people. The right is always attacking and attacking and attacking. And if you think about human nature, when you're being blasted by someone, do you want to be on their side, right? If you're, for example, Taylor Swift, who, listen, she has made terrible political statements in the past. I will not defend her. I'm not a fan of hers. I don't like her music. But Taylor Swift could be a lot worse. Okay, she could be way worse. She's not making an open endorsement for Biden this time. She's made statements in the past. I understand that. But she could be so much worse. We attack her like she's the worst thing in the entire world, like she's Satan incarnate. Instead of thinking, wait, how can we win this lady over? We can still criticize her, especially when she's done something bad. But we share certain things in common. Like she says that she's a Christian. She says, she comes from a relatively conservative family. Instead of attacking her, how to win friends and influence people. Let's show a little bit of discernment here and say, okay, I'm gonna correct you when correction is due. But I'm not going to give the left a monopoly on celebrating you. I'm going to say, hang on, you can join us, right? We would love to have you be a part of our ranks. I think to Mark Zuckerberg, the reason I mention him in the fact that he's in combat sports, as somebody who's trained in combat sports for probably the majority of my life now, that is a high testosterone, very conservative environment. Typically speaking, you're not going to find a bunch of hippy-dippy, prissy, liberal soy boys in a jiu-jitsu dojo or a boxing gym or something like that. It's really not going to happen. So when we see a guy like Mark Zuckerberg, who is constantly surrounded by alpha males. He's constantly surrounded by a high testosterone environment. He's at UFC fights all of the time. He's training in these gyms legitimately. Like he's actually probably a pretty decent fighter by now. He's training a lot. He's around people who are on our side. Immediately when we see these things, we should always be looking for them, by the way. And when we see these things, we should immediately think to ourselves, "Ooh, hang on. How do I have an objective to win him to our side?" Imagine, if you will, for just a second, that Mark Zuckerberg becomes a hardcore conservative. Now, I know that's asking for a lot, but imagine if he did. Think about how beneficial that would be for us. To get Mark Zuckerberg on our side would be awesome. It would be amazing to get Taylor Swift to lean into her Christian faith that she claims to have. If we can put people... We, as the public, can keep this in mind, but if we could very strategically put people in the right places to influence these folks, it would be brilliant. That's the kind of strategy that we need. We need to think about these things and figure out how can we win them over, because the left is the only one targeting them. The left is the only one creating culture. The right, funny enough, which is so crazy because we have what is good and just and beautiful and all of that, we have that on our side, but we're constantly attacking other things instead of building up what we have. Instead of saying, hey, listen, this is what we've got. We would love to have you be a part of this. There are things that we disagree with you on, but we can respectfully correct you on those things. We can offer up our idea, which is objectively a much better idea, and we can try and win those people over. Is that asking for too much? I know it's a big ask. Is it asking for too much to think, what if we were really strategic in the way that we attack these people and when we do that? But if we have in mind that we actually want to win them to our side, it would take a lot of prudence, a topic I wrote a book on. But if it could be done, it would be incredible. Let me know what you thought about that. Let me know what you thought about today's show. Be sure to share it with someone. That's all we have for today. Till next time, keep me in your prayers. Keep your country in your prayers. God bless.